You know, some people, they just don't want to see change. And that's always
No, really?
that is
Maine, I'm a Mainer. I'm against all change.
Yeah, well, that is one of the challenges that we have, is that people become familiar with a piece of property and they don't want to see change happen.
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Every fisherman in the state has his favorite fishing holes. Every deer hunter has his favorite spot in the woods. Be honest, places like Acadia National Park we save for the tourists. The places we go for fun are deep in the woods or out on remote ponds and lakes. We go where the tourists aren't. Scattered across the state are just over 60 wildlife management areas, supervised by the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. It totals 100,000 acres. That is twice the size of Acadia National Park. But how many people even know about them? How many Mainers even know? We are at one today, and this one isn't even that far off the beaten track. Today's show comes from Jamie's Pond in Hollowell. It's already pretty good for wildlife, but IF&W is in the process of making it even better, and we're going to take a look and see why. Put on some Blaze Orange and follow along. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS.
My name is Ryan Robichaud, and I am the Wildlife Management Section Supervisor for the department.
We're in the parking lot at Jamie's Pond on the edge of a hiking trail. In the distance, we can barely hear a feller buncher on the far side of the pond, somewhere up the hill. Ryan Robichaud is leading the way. Like much of Hollowell, there's a lot of history in this spot. The hillsides above the Kennebec River have seen many changes over the centuries. This is forest now, but 100 years ago, not so much. Welcome to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, Ryan.
Thank you for having me.
We're at Jamie's Pond in Hollowell. This is a wildlife management area. It's one I happen to know reasonably well. A lot of the radio shows I do are up in the North Woods or out along the northern coast and down East Maine. I don't get to the capital area very much, and certainly not to talk about Wild Maine, because this is actually a pretty settled area. It is.
Like you mentioned, it's quite different from areas in northern Maine. We are just outside of the capital of Augusta, and we're at the wildlife management area. Manchester and Hollowell are the two main municipalities in which this management area is located.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with the basics. What is Jamie's Pond?
Well, Jamie's Pond is about a 107-acre open water pond that was originally and still is actually a backup water supply for the city of Hollowell. The department did acquire the management area and the acres around the pond itself for inclusion into the wildlife management area system. It is a 915-acre wildlife management area that's open for public recreation, hunting, trapping, and fishing opportunities, as well as the main goal of the department for management areas is active management.
Now, who is Jamie?
That is a good question. We've not tied back into the history that far back to see how Jamie's Pond was named Jamie's Pond.
Yeah, there's a lot of wildlife management areas named after former game wardens and officials of the department, but nobody seems to know who Jamie was.
No, certainly not. I can say that it's not a past employee of the department. We very much like to name our management areas after natural features. I can think of several that still carry those names. Mm-hmm. In certain instances, our management areas are renamed to recognize people's dedication or efforts within the department.
Okay, now what is a wildlife management area?
Well, a wildlife management area is property that's owned by the state of Maine for the residents. It is included in the wildlife management area system, which is, I would say, those are areas that are held by the department for active wildlife of management, wildlife habitat, but also for public recreational use. We have about 100,000 acres of wildlife management areas statewide, and those are broken out until just over 60 wildlife management areas throughout the state. We own and manage these areas in all counties of the state. although our ownership is more heavily focused in southern and coastal Maine around the population centers of the state.
I looked to see how many wildlife management areas you had up in Aroostook County, and out in the woods, not that many.
No, we have actually some larger wildlife management areas up in the county. We have Lieutenant Gordon Manual Wildlife Management Area.
I have not seen that one yet. That's on my bucket list.
Yeah, Dickwood Lake Wildlife Management Area, and then we have two smaller gems of wildlife management areas, which are mainly grassland focused management along the Aroostook River, just south of Ashland.
Yep. Okay. So those are what wildlife management areas are, and the key, I think, is that it's about 100,000 acres altogether, which is more than Acadia National Park.
Yeah, it's when you total the acres up, it is a fairly large area. Most of our management areas top out, the larger ones top out between 6,000 and 8,000 acres. We have a large cohort between 1,000 and 5,000 acres, which is a sizable piece of ground when you're close to municipalities and in larger population centers. And then we have some smaller parcels that are scattered in between, and we effectively aggregate those into a single management area so that we can plan and oversee those properties effectively.
Some of them are hard to find. Dresden Bog, I've tried once. I did succeed, but it took a while.
Yeah. I would point people to our website, which has an updated mapping component, which is a Google Earth application that would actually allow people to get a little bit more familiar about where these parcels are. In the near future, we hope to have better information about how to access these parcels if access is not quite apparent. Most of our management areas, like Jamie's Pond here, it's pretty self-evident where access may be. There may be a boat launch associated with the parcel, like Jamie's Pond here. But that is one thing that the department is going to redouble efforts and hopefully expand the level of use that we see on our management areas.
Yeah, there's a wide variation among all of the wildlife management areas as to what their access and usability is. So for Jamie's Pond, where we are right now, is a very well-developed trail system with good markings and even some signage.
It is. As we've acquired the property and future acquisitions, subsequent acquisitions to the original, core network or core ownership of the parcel, we have worked with the local municipalities and interested folks to develop a trail network to get people onto the property and to utilize it for recreational opportunities.
But then you take something like a Sandy Point wildlife management area. There's basically hand launch boat opportunities there. If you can get through the reeds enough to get into the main pond, there's nothing else there that you can access.
It is very limited upland sites for access, and of course it's a fairly shallow water body itself. Sandy Pond specifically was acquired for waterfowl production, so whether or not we would actively look to increase the footprint of any access component on a management area like that is something that would have to be incorporated into our planning process.
Well, don't bother, because I like it the way it is. I get to use it because I know how to get in.
Well, and it's a double-edged sword between people. Some people want to have a more remote, less interaction with other recreational users. So if you make substantial improvements, you're obviously going to increase the amount of people that are using those properties, and it may take away from some people that may be local residents. They walk out their back door and they're onto the management area. But really, it's a public resource that needs to be managed with all those considerations taken into account.
And so we get back to the variability among all of these, because you call them wildlife management areas. A lot of these are managing different types of wildlife. So a lot of the wetlands, of course, duck and fish habitat, that sort of thing. You take a Fry Mountain, for instance, that may be upland game birds that you're managing that for. Yes,
Fry Mountain's a pretty unique piece of property in that I think more than 98% of it is upland forest, reverted farm fields from when the department acquired it. And back in the late 70s, early 80s, the department did identify that as an area that we wanted to manage for upland game birds, grouse, woodcock. So they pretty early into active management on the property, they started to create habitat that would be beneficial for those species, and we've continued on since then. So it's a management area where you can see the history and the management approach that's been taken. Actually, Kelsey Sullivan, our game bird biologist, has that as a component of his rough grouse study that he has ongoing, where he has radio tags in birds, and he's doing a survival and reproduction study.
Did a show on that last year. It was one of my favorite shows of the whole year.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I've been out there since then to see some of Kelsey's trap setups and how he gets the birds to do what he wants to do, so he can capture them.
That is so cool.
It's pretty neat. Yep. So these are very much management areas are also they're a research opportunity for the department to get better information about wildlife species and wildlife use of habitat. It's also a demonstration area for people who are interested in managing their property to see what might be done to benefit wildlife and habitat and to reach their goals as a property owner, whether they're a large commercial owner or a small woodlot owner.
We're at Jamie's Pond Wildlife Management Area in Hollowell. Ryan Robichaud supervises wildlife management areas for the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. I've been to a lot of them, and I keep committing the sin of thinking everyone else knows these places we're talking about. Sandy Point is in Stockton Springs. Fry Mountain is in Montville. Dresden Bog is in Dresden, down in the direction of Wiscasset. Up next, why would a department that manages game be harvesting wood at Jamie's Pond? What are they managing for exactly? When Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine continues on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. It's Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. I'm with Ryan Robichaud at Jamie's Pond Wildlife Management Area in Hollowell. Ryan supervises all these areas for the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and they're actively cutting timber in here, specifically to improve it for critters. Now, we're walking this area right now, so what are you managing it for?
Well, we've done a comprehensive review of the existing forest conditions on Jamie's Pond Wildlife Management Area, and we have a focus for management of biological diversity, manipulating forest stands to adjust the forest structure so that it is beneficial to a whole suite of wildlife species. We also are focused in on some particular wildlife species that would be benefited from these treatments. White-tailed deer is one of those species. We are focused on promoting softwood cover for wintering deer and also enhancing the hard mass component, to provide a better food source. And inherently, with any type of manipulation of the forest and removing trees, you're going to create a browse component that will be beneficial relatively short term, over 5 to 7 years, until it grows out of the height of deer browse. But that's a critical component, especially in relation to winter shelter for deer. They need access to food. So a lot of people think that it's best left, if you have conforming cover, softwood cover for wintering deer, that is better left intact, where actually you need that food source within or relatively close to that conforming cover to provide that benefit to the deer and sustain them through the winter. We also have a focus in some acres, depending on the forest structure and forest type, to improve it for game birds. So we do have some early successional components of our current management activities out here that are going to promote habitat for woodcock and grouse, but also the suite of songbirds that come along with that habitat.
Yeah, if you ever want to know what's in here, I can tell you.
Yeah, I'm sure you could, Bob. Yeah.
Yeah, but turkeys, you got a lot of turkeys in here. What are you going to do about that?
Well, turkeys are, they're on site. I've actually hunted Jamie's Pond here for turkey myself and have had success. So I enjoy it. I think there's several other folks that avail themselves of that opportunity as well. In terms of their potential impact on reaching our management goals, we don't necessarily see the turkeys being a detriment to that. So we'll live with them. They're on the management area. We'll enhance the habitat for them as well. But their population is not adversely affecting anything we do in the woods.
It was about 6 or 7 years ago. I was walking in the woods here on one of these trails with a fellow representative from the Maine legislature. We were walking along, chatting, and we hear turkeys in the distance, and we're getting closer and closer to them. And it turns out it's two hunters.
Yeah.
Who now are walking down the trail at us, smiling, saying, "I'll bet you didn't think we were here."
Right. Well, it's pretty funny that actually when I was out here hunting for turkey, that time that I was successful, I had a hen turkey that I swore was another hunter. She was just going to beat the band, and I thought it was somebody else that didn't quite know what they were doing. But it always amazes me, and that's why I enjoy hunting. Is you see something different, you hear something different, and it gets you into the woods. So that's always something the department is looking to, increase people's understanding and ability to get on the landscape and take advantage of those opportunities, which is the other critical component of wildlife management areas, is providing people that opportunity.
Now, as we talked about before, there's a lot of diversity in all these stands. I take a Green Point, for instance, down the Kennebec a little bit. That's mostly an open grassland area, surrounded by a few trees, and there's a lot of wild rice in the river, so ducks congregate in there. So your plan for managing something like that would be completely different from this, which is mostly wooded plus the one pond itself. What goes into making plans like that, and how do you prioritize which one of these wildlife management areas you're going to do next?
Well, we do go through a planning process within the department to identify those areas that are scheduled based on our wildlife management area planning process to receive treatment, or at least a review to assess whether or not a treatment would be beneficial or not. So we do balance our management across the state, so we try to move around so that it makes a logical process in terms of developing those plans and implementing those plans on the landscape. One
of the challenges you would have to face, especially in an area that's relatively developed like Jamie's Pond is, you have an awful lot of butters and neighbors who use this as their own backyard, and all of a sudden the trees are being harvested. So you have to manage a certain amount of public expectations on what they consider to be their own backyards. How does that work?
Well, that is a consideration when we are operating in a more densely populated area of the state, is we do focus our outreach efforts to make sure that people are aware that we have upcoming plans to manage the property. We do public outreach to the local municipalities to inform them of what we plan to do and how we plan to do it. And then we do have discussions with landowners to make sure that they're comfortable with, especially when you're operating timber harvest, you need to be aware that your boundary lines are well marked, that you go through your due diligence to make sure that you're doing things that are appropriate. But we very much see the management that we undertake on the properties as an educational opportunity to point out to people that you can be doing something on your property that is both aesthetically pleasing, that's beneficial to wildlife, that may produce some income or some revenue if you're a private landowner. So those are things that we hope to educate people about. So we do buffer, boundary lines in certain instances. Other instances, we actively manage the properties, and we think we do a good job. So we're not bashful of what we do, and we want people to see it.
And really, you have the challenge of introducing or reintroducing diversity into some of these stands. You take this area, 100 years ago, this was probably all agricultural farmland. And so all the trees that have grown up on it since the farms went away are relatively the same age. You don't have a lot of age diversity when you have that situation.
And that's exactly why we manage property, is because if you do and have even-aged forest stand conditions, the biological diversity associated with that is not necessarily high. So there's value to manipulating the forest to increase stand structure, vertical diversity, and you'll have more use of wildlife and provide more capacity for the area to support game species, non-game species, birds, the whole suite of species that would avail themselves of upland habitat. So you're exactly right. That even-age forest condition is not entirely beneficial. There are some benefits to having mature wood and closed canopy conditions, but there's also value to having diversity within the landscape, and that's really the approach the department takes. And one of the reasons why we look at doing things on a little bit larger scale is it gives us the flexibility to do things in some areas, maybe not do things in other areas that are over the whole are going to provide the maximum benefit for wildlife.
So here's the challenge you must face a lot. A forester who is managing it for revenue has a suite of problems that he has to face, and a lot of them are just regulatory. How close to the stream can I cut? All that stuff. But you've got to manage for a whole lot of things. You've got to manage for the people who use it. You've got to manage for the wildlife. You've got to manage for any recreational uses, such as boat launches and trails. Any natural resources on there that others wouldn't necessarily know about, rare and endangered species. there must be an awful lot of feedback from a lot of different people when you have to put one of these plans together.
There is quite a bit of feedback, and it's quite a process to develop the information that allows us to implement our management plan and reach our habitat goals on a specific piece of property. It is thoroughly reviewed for existing staying conditions, and that includes the public recreational access. It may include management access needs or opportunities. It would also include any review of rare, threatened, or endangered species habitats, but also rare natural plant communities. So those are all part of the comprehensive planning that goes into our prescription development and outlines what we can do. There may be time of year restrictions for certain species, like the northern long-eared bat. Mm-hmm. Those are particular adjustments you can make in your management approach that are going to, in the long term, either negate negative influences on those species or have some sort of benefit to those species.
My guest is Ryan Robichaud. He's the Wildlife Management Area Supervisor for 100,000 acres of wildlife habitat for the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. We're taking a walk in one of those areas, Jamie's Pond in Hollowell, where they are actively harvesting trees to improve the area for game species and others. What, where, why, that's all up next. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. We're at Jamie's Pond Wildlife Management Area. That's in Hollowell. Ryan Robichaud manages over 60 such areas around the state for the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. This one is getting a facelift. We are now walking the woods. So, where are we, Ryan?
This is one of the designated hiking trails on Jamie's Pond here, and there's quite a network of trails. I think they have more than 5 miles of trails on Jamie's Pond here. So it's quite the network of trails, and there's actually a kiosk up ahead that would outline where you are on the property, what trail you're on, where the other trails are, and other access opportunities onto the management area. So one of the things that we've done recently to enable us to manage the property but also take into consideration where these trails are and the network of the trails is to minimize our crossings of the trails associated with the management, but also change equipment approaches in areas that are maybe heavily networked with trails. We'll use a different type of equipment so that we've reduced the impact to that trail and allows people to maintain and enjoy use of those trail systems as well.
Okay, so far, what I've been looking at is a real balancing act. The trails are well maintained, but not groomed and not too wide. That would spook the critters. They're improving the age, height, and species diversity in the forest, releasing some of the better trees, weeding out some of the sicker ones, creating some early successional forest where there really wasn't any, and doing it all while trying to minimize impacts on the recreational values. To do that, they're taking extraordinary measures. Where the harvesting is away from the trails, they're using feller bunchers, dragging out the whole tree with grapple skidders. Where the woods are denser or near the trails, they're using a processor, cutting the trees to length and carrying them out on a forwarder. These can work in tighter areas, creating less of a corridor in the woods. You might not even notice it. They leave the slash in piles for wildlife that uses the brush for cover. Every single tree that has been designated for removal has been painted, and only those trees will come out. In one case, I've seen a tree that was circled with red paint, but the forester changed his mind and painted no above it, deciding to leave that tree as a standing snag for hawks and owls instead. This is absolutely painstaking. You've got a wildlife management area in Jonesboro that I've hiked it once.
Yes.
And it seems to be all you were really breeding in there was mosquitoes. What's that one there for?
Well, Jonesboro was specifically acquired for upland game birds, for deer habitat, and for hare habitat. So one of our management approaches, obviously, and might have been the portion of the Jonesboro management area that you were recreating on, was patch cut early successional habitat that was focused on game birds.
Yep.
interesting to note that, because of adjacent land uses off of the management area, we consider that as well. So most of the areas around the management area have now been intensively harvested and have the opportunity to provide the same type of habitat that we were managing for on the property. So that, in effect, may change our management approach down the road, because now we may be the only parcel in the local area that has mature standing trees. So that would be a habitat that we would look to promote and maintain.
Oh, here's that. I've actually never been on this little piece of the trail.
Yeah.
So I did not know this kiosk was here.
So you can see here, the main tributary into Jamie's Pond is ahead of us here. And, I mentioned some of the environmental concerns we have with trails and making sure that they don't negatively impact the habitat. Therefore, we have a bridge that crosses the stream instead of forcing people to ford through the water. Or, if you have a ford through the water, you're going to eventually have material that gets down into the stream.
When you are managing, you have to make a choice sometimes as to whether this is going to be better for recreational values or wildlife. There's a compromise there somewhere. Is it determined on a area-by-area basis?
It is. It's determined on an area-by-area basis. Our main focus is wildlife habitat. Our secondary focus is public recreational use. So that is pretty clearly spelled out in our department objectives, and where we have the opportunity to manage and have differing levels of recreational use intensities, we certainly do that, with the caveat that ultimately it's the wildlife habitat that will be managed for. Most all recreational uses can be considered and worked into any habitat management that we do. Some people, they just don't want to see change, and that's always
No, really?
that is
Maine. I'm a Mainer. I'm against all change.
Yeah, well, that is one of the challenges that we have, is that people become familiar with a piece of property, and they don't want to see change happen. And because we're dealing with forested situations or other early successional habitats or grasslands, if you don't manage those, it's going to change regardless. We're just changing it to best meet our habitat goals that we've identified. So
for a lot of these, especially where you're trying to promote recreational values, you're trying to promote the ability for people to get into it and enjoy it. There are some places you don't want people to go, and I'm thinking right now of Westgate Marsh.
Yes.
Westgate Marsh is really one of the best marshes in the state for wading birds and waterfowl, and I would love to see some trail that goes right down the middle of it to the back edge. But that would disturb the birds. So
yeah, you're exactly right, Bob. It is one of the higher value birding areas that we have, and that was exactly the problem we were faced with. Is that the birding community, they forged their own trails out into the marsh.
Guilty.
And it started to become apparent that if it continued, there may be some negative impacts associated with that. So one of the things the department did was put in a trail to a viewing platform to keep people out of the marsh and also provide them the same opportunity to see those birds that they came to see.
Yep. No, I happen to love that marsh.
Yeah, it's very nice. We've actually acquired some additional acres down there through I think it was the Lowe's mitigation that they had to set aside some acres. So we took that upon ourselves to graciously accept.
And one member of your department got some Boy Scouts to go down and do some improvements too.
That's right, our bureau director. He was pretty effective. Yes.
Yeah, did a great job.
So the West Keg Marsh Wildlife Management Area is one that we do actively manage for grassland. There are some forested acres that down the road we may choose to manage, but we've instituted a mowing regime down there where we manipulate the fields on a rotational basis to benefit wildlife habitat.
There are some ponds where they can get choked out by cattails. So as much as you have to manage trees, do you also have to manage vegetation in wetlands?
Well, we do. Mainly we do that through water level manipulation. Right. A good cohort or a large cohort of our management areas were acquired specifically for waterfowl production, and most of those are associated with water control structures that we have the ability to manipulate to maximize the hemi-marsh conditions in those types of habitats. We also have, in southern Maine, some invasive species issues that we've been dealing with, Scarborough marsh specifically, and Phragmites. So we do manipulate, invasive vegetation, both in wetland habitats, but also upland habitats.
Ryan Robichaud manages Maine's wildlife management areas, and we're walking the back trails of Jamie's Pond in Hollowell. Straight ahead, there's a strange and old structure nearly blocking our path. I don't know what it is, but I bet we find out when Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine returns in a moment on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. The Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife manages 100,000 acres of secret places in wildlife management areas. The guy in charge of that is Ryan Robichaud, and we're walking the trails at Jamie's Pond in Hollowell. This forest was once farm, and apparently something else. Big blocks of granite are piled across a stream right here deep in the woods. So what is this?
Well, obviously it's a dam of some nature. It was more than likely associated with a small sawmill. It's interesting, some of those old photos I mentioned were taken from up along the road there. And you can see the logs that are piled up there in the photos from the 1920s. So this was obviously used to power some type of equipment to more than likely saw out material.
Yeah, essentially there's a sort of a ravine in the woods where the river is running through it, and then big blocks of granite that looks like they dammed it at one point, and then the grist mill or sawmill or whatever that water wheel was doing was right here.
Yeah, and it's really well preserved. It's a pretty neat structure for sure.
So what's your background? Forestry, biology?
My background is in forestry, licensed forester, and I came out of the lands program for the department myself. So I had 10 years doing exactly this, overseeing the management of the properties, putting into effect the wildlife habitat goals that the regional wildlife biologists have.
So internally, behind closed doors, you're planning this stuff out. Do your biologists ever argue?
Well, they're a lot like foresters. Everybody has a particular opinion, and it's just as much art as it is science. There is a lot of flexibility in terms of how you exactly reach your goals that you have on the landscape, and it runs the gamut. There is considerable discussion back and forth as to the best approach to reach our goals.
Yeah. Does it get even worse with a fisheries biologist?
Like I said,
treading on dangerous ground there, Bob.
in my opinion, there's no difference between fisheries biologists and wildlife biologists in terms of their propensity for opinions, for sure.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever met one that didn't have an opinion.
Right. So you see this pine stand here, Bob. This is old field reverted pine that has not been operated. So you can see all of these trees are the same age, pretty poorly formed in terms of the growing conditions, that they were never tended. So we're dealing with a low value, low quality stand.
No real saw logs in here.
No. So, our management approach in a stand like this that's not been harvested is to focus the removals on the poorest form individuals. Generally, those are going to be the individuals that are going to eventually succumb because they aren't performing well. And it would also start to change the light conditions in the understory to allow for additional trees to start growing. And over time, this stand right here, given the soil conditions, would trend towards a hardwood stand.
Yeah. And when you talk about underperforming trees or malformed, the ones that are marked are the ones that are not particularly straight. They've got a lot of side trunks, 3 or 4 different branches of trunk, none of which is really going to survive the test of time.
No, they won't. And those same deformities in the tree itself lend itself towards weaknesses that would, they'll be more likely to break or bend in a storm. When you have limbs that break off, you have the ability or the increased chance that a pathogen will enter into those injuries, and those are going to be the trees that start to die first. That being said, there are trees, and a heavy component of what we do is retain those standing dead trees because that's extremely valuable wildlife habitat. So we have guidelines in our protocols to identify and retain those trees on the landscape. And that's when we look to actively manage the property, that we look to work with individuals that are capable of recognizing, number one, what our goals are, number two, how we lay out a job, that they understand what they're doing and how they're going to do it, and then also that they can meet those goals that we have.
Well, you get your finger right on it, because you take a look at the stand here. You're right next to Jamie's Pond. You're in the woods here. So wood duck, mergansers, barred owl, they all nest in cavities. If you don't have some old trees with holes in them, they got no place to call home.
Extremely valuable to wildlife, and wildlife habitat is what they call snag trees. So those are standing dead trees, and you also want to retain a certain percentage of those on the landscape, but you also want to plan for recruitment of additional standing deadwood. And it goes, trees that die and fall over and are on the ground are going to be beneficial wildlife habitat as well. But yeah, those cavity trees, trees with active nests that you can see, stick nests in them, those are generally retained within our operation.
So do you have a favorite wildlife management area?
My favorite wildlife management area, that's pretty tough. I like the Major Greg Sanborn Wildlife Management Area, which was recently renamed from the Brownfield Bog Wildlife Management Area.
I love that one.
And I say it because it's extremely diverse in terms of the habitats that are associated with the management area. Obviously, there's the Brownfield Bog, which is substantial. Has a lot of unique forest communities down there. Silver maple floodplain forest, pitch pine scrub oak forest.
It also has the historical artifacts of a dynamite shed still there.
Yeah. Well, there's actually some Native American campsites were identified on the western edge or the eastern side of Lovewell Pond. But it also has the best white pine stand that I've had the pleasure of working in. So, and associated with that white pine is excellent deer wintering habitat. So it's pretty interesting.
And that's just full of mosquitoes.
Oh yeah, I actually did the layout over there when we had a large timber harvest down there for habitat, and it was bad.
Yeah. It is one of the best wildlife management areas in the States, way down almost, it's Freiburg area, down not far from the New Hampshire border. But it's a diverse, wonderful habitat in there, if you can survive it.
Yeah, it is gorgeous. We do a lot of work down there. From the upland habitat work, we've actually had prescribed fire is one of our management activities down there, and the pitch pine scrub oak to perpetuate that community. Excuse me. And we have many duck boxes down there for waterfowl production. It's just a great system.
The basic point of today's show is that the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife is managing wildlife areas for the public that exceeds twice the acreage of Acadia National Park. They're all usable by you, but some are more usable than others. Some of my favorites are barely usable at all. Where they are and how to find them is up next as Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine continues on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Ryan Robichaud manages Maine's wildlife management areas for the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. We're walking the trails at Jamie's Pond in Hollowell, which is getting a makeover right now to improve wildlife habitat. Some of these management areas have great trails, like this one. But some of them you can barely use, Ryan.
Well, some are,
Not much.
Yeah, some are challenging. Even
Mendel Marsh in Frankfurt. What are you going to do with that?
Well, that's you can certainly come and paddle that. We actually, we are and do have plans that might increase the ability for people to take advantage of upland activities on the management area. But some of them can be challenging and pretty specific to what you might want to do on the property. So that's one of the benefits of our website is we have a nice description of the parcels, what towns they're located in, how many acres they are, whether they have a public boat access location, whether there's fishing opportunities available.
Well, some of them are really extraordinary boating opportunities. I'm thinking Lyle Frost Wildlife Management Area.
That is a gem as well. We recently did some management down there on the upland component of the property. So I spent a lot of time down there overseeing that project, and I've paddled it only a few times, but it is really a great paddle. Goes up for quite a ways, and I always am jealous when I talk to the regional biologists and they say they've been out doing their brood checks, and they spent the morning out there just paddling up and down and counting what they see for wildlife, and it's really a gem of a management area.
Okay, sensitive question. I stay in the area quite a bit. I can hear coyotes out here every now and then. Are there many people in the area who complain their pets are missing and blame you?
Not a lot. It's surprising that, and I know that animals, domestic pets are taken by coyotes. I actually lost a cat last year to coyotes out behind my house. But we don't hear very much complaints or concerns from people. I think they're generally well aware enough that coyotes exist and predators exist in the woods, whether it's a coyote or a bobcat or a lynx, even up north. That they, we're Mainers. We know wildlife is out there, and that's something that we live with. We just popped onto a main skid trail that goes back to a yard out towards the public road, and this has been harvested. You can see that there's plenty of trees remaining on the landscape. What our main focus in here was to promote the hemlock component within the stand. You'll see some younger trees in the understory that were released to allow those trees to grow and become eventually the next overstory. Which
is noteworthy because a lot of forest management plans would not emphasize hemlock.
Right.
The reason you do is?
Well, that is one of the things that we do manage for, where we have goals that would be beneficial for wintering deer, is to promote and retain that hemlock component. Hemlock is an extremely long-lived tree, and the benefits of snow interception and temperature moderation is substantial enough that deer in the winter will seek out areas of hemlock to overwinter. I don't know if we mentioned yet, but the provision of browse or food resources for winter sustenance is pretty critical as well when you think about deer yard management. So it's a balance of conforming cover, having a dense enough crown closure that intercepts the snow, but also the access to food in and adjacent to deer wintering areas.
So much of it has to do with connectivity. You can have good winter habitat, but if it's not near the food, basically your bed is too far from the kitchen.
Right, and you can build on areas of conforming cover by providing travel corridors as well. So even though in between larger areas of conforming cover, you may have only a narrow sliver of cover that deer will use in the wintertime. You want to be aware of connectivity of habitat, and that goes beyond deer to most all wildlife.
So once again, this is a wildlife management area with the emphasis on management. We've talked repeatedly about using wildlife management areas for habitat, for access, for recreation, for hunting. But you got to realize it's being managed for the habitat.
Yeah, that's probably one of the more common discussions I have with landowners or stakeholders that are interested in the parcels, is that because our entries are so infrequent, they may be spaced out 10, 15, even 30 years apart, that people don't necessarily recognize that parcels are managed, have been managed in the past, or may be managed in the future. So there's a perception out there that the wildlife management areas are set-asides, that they're preserves to be a forested, static condition through the course of time. But that's very much not the case. We actively manage for wildlife habitat because we see the benefits and the response of both the forest structure or grass structure or wetland habitats that we manage for. We also see the responding effects for wildlife habitat or wildlife that use that habitat. So you see a response in the forest. You also see a response in species using that area.
Yeah. So wildlife management areas aren't preserves; they're not parks. We're asking this forest to actually do things.
We are. We want to manage the property. As good stewards of the land. But also to maximize the wildlife habitat that's available to meet the goals the department has. Our management is not only focused on what the forest is currently structured as. We also want to manage to meet our wildlife management plans. So our deer species management plan, our moose management plan, our upland bird management plan, we see the wildlife management areas as an important part in meeting those goals to provide habitat, to provide the opportunity for those species to propagate and to maintain and to sustain them over time for people's use and enjoyment. I would encourage people, if they haven't heard of management areas or they haven't been on a management area, go to our website. Pick one out that's in your local area. You should have one within relatively easy driving distance from you.
Yeah, there are interactive maps, so you can't screw this up.
Right, they are. You can zoom in, you can zoom out. You can see where the road frontage is that you might be able to easily access those locations from. We also have coordinates, GPS coordinates of the access points that we've identified and maintained and improved for public access. So if you ever have any questions or concerns, the regional wildlife biologists are available to respond to your inquiries and provide further information if you're having difficulties.
So maybe now I can find Dresden Bog.
That's right. Well, we'll get you out there soon.
Right.
And with that, we'll take leave of this wildlife management area and make plans to visit others. My thanks to Ryan Robichaud, who supervises these areas for the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. We've been traipsing the trails at Jamie's Pond in Hollowell. There's 100,000 acres of these special places scattered across the map. Look them up at maine.gov/IFW and find them under Wildlife. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS. We'll return next Saturday morning at 9 and Sunday morning at 8. And remember, all shows are archived at 929theticket.com, so you can re-listen or share any show with anybody. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.